Welcome back to Mishmash Men. Got another episode with you. Again, Dusty's out, but like I said, I'm going to hold down the fort till he comes back. I'm looking forward to having him back. In the meantime, I've been having a series of guest hosts, guest interviews, and I'm going to keep that rolling. Hopefully you all enjoy it. And this week we have Mr. James Drake. He is a friend of the gym, a good personal friend. He is a mechanical engineer by training and by profession, but he's also a farmer.
That's true.
And so welcome to the podcast. We're going to talk about, today, we're going to talk about farming, impacts of legislation, farming culture, all things farming, and we might talk a little bit about how our government either adds or subtracts from that culture. So, and the culture at large. So welcome, James.
Hey, thank you very much for having me.
I am delighted you're here.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. Yeah, seriously, I was very thankful you invited me on. It's always good to talk.
It is. It's and I like to hear what you have to say because you're an interesting guy and a very diverse background, an interesting background. So you grew up in the area.
I did. Born in Huntsville. And pretty much grew up here the whole time. After Auburn, I went to school at Auburn, and after that, I graduated and moved over to Atlanta. And I was there a short stint, about a year and a half, and then ended up coming back to Huntsville.
And then you, your dad and you come from a legacy of farming. They had land in the area.
Oh yeah. My family has been here for a while. In fact, the land that I'm on dates back to a Revolutionary War land grant. And so the Drake family's been here for a very long time, generations. And it is, going back in that time, everybody was a farmer.
Right.
And it's just kind of progressed over the generations. And so, for me personally, I remember my grandparents and my uncle running the show, and then that changed hands over to my father, and he has retired. Essentially, he's got his small farm that he's working, but he's basically in retirement. In other words, he's not growing anything, doesn't have livestock. He's just enjoying the land.
Yeah. And
I am running the cattle operation. We used to have a dairy back in the 80s and before then. So we had dairy cattle, and since then, I would say it was about in the mid 1980s, we shut the dairy down, and that became a beef cattle operation.
Right.
And it's just been passed down, and now I've got it. So
you raise cattle and sell off at auction
I do.
Producers, and then there we go. And so that's how we get hamburger and steaks.
Pretty much. Yeah. Yeah. That's circle of life. So
it's interesting. You probably heard this too, but there's folks that kind of occupy. Usually, there's folks that live in big cities, and they think that they go to the store and they might not be vegetarians, but they think that that's where food comes from.
Oh yeah,
and it's sad. It's a sad state of affairs that there's a disconnect, that people don't realize that the people like you, even industrial farms, that somebody's got to do it. Somebody's got to dig a hole, put a seed in it.
Yes.
Keep the weeds out, harvest whatever's produced.
Yeah.
Clean it, ship it through trucking, rail, and all that sort of thing. And it's got to be some amount of processing and packaging, and then it gets to the grocery store.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't get it.
It's not magic.
It's not magic. There's no fairy that comes and waves a magic wand, and then all of a sudden there's food. So it's interesting. So long line of farming, and so you're a cattle farmer. What's the difference between a cattle farm for beef, let's say, and a rancher? What's the difference?
Really, I don't know the true definition. I know how I define it, and it's really size. Size of the operation, size of the property. I always chuckle when we have visitors, friends come out or whatever, and they standing on the back porch looking out over the farm, and they make the comment, oh my gosh, you're just like the show Yellowstone. I'm like, no, we're not. Yeah. I can walk from one end to the other within an hour.
Yeah.
the Yellowstone Ranch, you're dealing with days.
Yeah.
So the land size is totally different.
And you're not backed into a railroad line where you can drop people off.
Right. And
fortunately or unfortunately.
yeah. And so for the number of head that I run is 100 head and below. Mm-hmm. And that's a small farm operation. When you start talking about ranching or some even just industrial farms, big farms, I mean, you're in the several hundred. The ranches out west, they are in the thousands, and it's just an enormous operation. That's where they have a full staff of cowboys,
Yeah.
And just like you do see on the TV show Yellowstone, and I'm sure the drama is not there, and neither is the shooting.
Right.
We hope.
Yeah.
And but I would say that's the biggest difference. It's just size of the operation, and so I would be insulting our brothers in the West if I said I had a ranch.
Yeah. So what kind of challenges do you have? You said you have about 100 head, and like you said, that's not a huge operation. Although if you're looking at it historically, that's pretty good size. That's a decent size.
It is.
But these days we've kind of grown into this industrial farming. We, as in the United States and over in Europe too. But those regulations that come, they become a challenge, and there might be some cultural challenges. So if you don't mind, let's talk about some of those challenges that you have personally that you see.
Yeah. I mean, just logistically dealing with it, I'm a one-person, one-man show.
Yeah.
So that gets pretty difficult.
Plus a day job.
Plus that's
recording podcasts from time.
I know. Yeah, I've had friends and acquaintances. They always ask, they're like, "Would you do it full time?" And I'm like, you can't live.
No.
Not on the size operation I've got. You can't live. If money was no issue, didn't have to worry about money. Yeah, I probably would, because it's very rewarding and it's enjoyable. But talking about the challenges, in terms of, I would say, like legislation, there's always new rules coming out that we have to be careful about. I am a small operation, so that helps. And on top of it, Alabama is very agricultural friendly. Mm-hmm. We do have a pretty strong, I would say, lobbyist group, and because I've heard that joked about in different political discussions. They're like, well, you don't mess with the farmers,
right.
They'll take you down. And so that, we do have a strong presence in the government for Alabama, and that, I think that helps. I really do. That's one reason why property taxes in Alabama are reasonable. Mm-hmm. Especially when you compare it to other states, Alabama's can be described as cheap to live.
Yeah.
So that's helpful. Always worry about. You do worry about, I would say, tax assessment. Even though, in other words, just last year, I had to go down to the county office, and I had to argue with them, or better yet, appeal. Let's use that word. I had to appeal with the county office. Because the taxes that they assessed were triple. Actually, close to 4 times what I had paid the year before.
And this is like property taxes.
Property tax. And okay, it was still a manageable bill, but at the same time, when I looked, I thought, well, that's higher than last year. What happened? And I see this big jump, and I thought, well, something's changed. And I saw the classification. Well, they classified it as development. Huh. And that's mainly because the location I'm in, the city limits I've become an island. City limits have encroached all the way around me. So I've got Huntsville City all around Madison County, where my farm is. And they basically said, they were like, well, when they looked into it, they go, oh, okay, well, they used the wrong layer on the map when they ran their assessment. They had you down as future development. Yeah. I'm like, ma'am, I'm not selling anything. I'm not developing anything.
Yeah.
And so I had to, that was about 2 or 3 days of angst trying to get that fixed. On a bigger scale, talking about producing beef, I have folks asking all the time. Even the gym has asked.
I've asked.
Oh yeah, about selling beef. There's different rules and games you got to play,
Right.
and that is, okay, we can go in and buy a cow, and I'll get that cow processed. Doesn't have to be at an FDA producer, because you've basically bought part of that livestock. You're part owner, and so when it's slaughtered, you're able to get the beef from it. But I cannot just carry a cow to any butcher, slaughter it, and then just turn that out on free market.
Right.
And that is a major no-no.
There are legal restrictions to that. So
There
there's
is.
Alabama law that says you can't a cow.
It's more, actually it's FDA.
So it's a federal thing.
It is a federal thing, and that I am required to carry. Yeah, but what I would end up having to do is that I have to find an FDA registered slaughterhouse and processor. And there are some, but the rules and regulations that are coming out don't necessarily affect me directly, but they are very heavy on these processors, and so the small mom and pop processors are fewer and fewer are getting that FDA certification.
Right.
So it becomes harder and harder for the small producers to get the beef to market.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So in other words, they're putting the screws to the processors, and I've talked with a few. There's one I think up in Pulaski that I heard through a contact of mine. The owner basically said, like, I don't know if I want to keep this up.
Yeah.
Because the profit is not there. They basically says, like, look, I can make just as much money, if not more, doing deer meat for hunters, and
it's not as regulated.
Right, it's not. And so that's where they're kind of scratching their head of like, well, is it really worth the effort of having the certification?
Yeah.
And so it becomes harder for me to try and figure out, okay, how am I going to sell a cow, individual piece part? It's called freezer beef, basically, is what it's called.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, and this ties into something I want to get to shortly. We'll do that. But so ostensibly, the FDA, Food and Drug Administration, a federal administration, they are looking out for our safety.
Right.
So
they say.
as consumers. So they say. That's ostensibly. I don't use that word lightly either. So that's the goal of it. And a quote, I think it's Benjamin Franklin. I don't know when he said it or when he wrote it, but those that will trade their freedom for safety will get neither.
Oh, I love that quote.
Or something along those lines.
It's something along those lines, and it is so true.
It is so true. But what it ends up doing is these regulations, they just kind of stack up. And then what you're describing is that creates a higher and higher barrier to entry for somebody. Let's say I want to do a meat processing operation.
Yeah.
And I could do everything that would keep my customers safe and happy and provided with good quality meat where I get more customers. But I might not comply with any of the regulations the way they're written.
Yeah.
And then I could get thrown in jail. I could be fined. Both of them. Even though my customers are happy. There's a great example of that is this whole raw milk thing.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Raw milk, we used to have cows, and we would milk them. The only way we could share that milk with others legally was to sell shares of each cow that we were milking.
Yeah, similar.
Yeah, so I had this legal agreement that I would have folks sign, and then a byproduct of owning an undivided interest in that cow was milk, and so my shareholders would come and pick up milk on a weekly basis. Completely legal.
That sounds so stupid, but that's what you got to do.
I had an attorney that specialized in this, and he helped me draw up the agreement. I made some modifications to it, besides just name and address and that sort of thing. He said, yeah, that should be good, and then I would have all my shareholders sign that agreement.
Yeah.
And then the part of this thing was, we paid him like an annual, wasn't a whole lot, but basically if I were to get sued or, the FDA came snooping around, or anybody else, Food and Drug Administration, and who are the others for that kind of thing. And there's some kind of farming agency that comes around.
What is it, USDA?
USDA.
Yeah.
Then if I got basically attacked, then he would represent me in court.
Yeah.
Who knows if it would have been successful or not. It never happened.
Yeah.
But I wasn't interested in selling bad milk.
Right.
It's not like we were just being sloppy with it because we were drinking. I mean, we literally put all this stuff, the same milk in the fridge, and then our shareholders would come in and take their milk. There was no like, okay, that's their milk and we'll keep the good stuff. I would keep the fresher. I would let them take the fresher stuff. I would take the older stuff. So
I mean, it's almost anything carried to the extreme goes crazy. So I mean, I can understand in the beginning, it was like, okay, well, we need to, provide some regulation because yes, you were being honorable, and you have the best intentions. However, there are times people make mistakes or may not have the best of intentions. And so that's where, I can understand the need. Okay, we need to come in and regulate this. We need to have some rules. I would say that the problem that I've always seen is that it doesn't stop. They just keep. It's like, well, it's almost like they got a job making rules and they need to justify their job, so they keep making rules. And so, I like I said, I mean, I can kind of understand, and I try to be objective about it. I was like, well, okay, I mean, you do need some regulations and this, that, the other. But at the same time, it's like it really does get just crazy.
Yeah, it does.
And I mean, that I can say the same thing about our tax code. But just every year I get so frustrated. I'm like, look, I'm trying to be a good citizen and do what I'm supposed to do, but I'm not an accountant. I understand numbers, but still, jumping through hoops, making sure I've got all this stuff together. Scared to death that if I get it wrong, I'm either going to jail or worse, they're going to come in and take something. You know. I guess I'm ranting, but anyways, like I said, I can kind of see both sides.
That's why we're here, James.
Yeah, I know. Is that I can see how it started, but it just seems to block. In other words, like, well, who's going to regulate the regulators?
Yeah,
is where I get to.
Well, it's interesting. Like when you look at OSHA, FDA, the folks that end up making all the rules are the ones like who gets invited to the meeting. Well, the biggest. And most prominent of those that are being regulated. Yeah. And so that ends up doing, it just jacks up that barrier to entry to where you have to be a large-scale operation to even compete because they don't want any competition. Those ones that help, we're just going to help make those rules so that we'll keep everybody safe.
Yeah. Well, I mean, also on that same note, talking about the barrier, one challenge, now I am lucky enough I don't have this challenge. Because my family held on to the property and it's just passed down.
Yeah.
There's a lot of folks out there that really want to be, in the farming industry. They enjoy it. And either they grew up on a farm and, the family was not able to hold it, or it got divided up, or they grew up in a culture that they worked on farms. I mean, I had a lot of friends in high school. We all worked on different neighbors and farms and this, that, the other. So, I mean, it was prominent. And so you see these young families that they actually want property. They want to have livestock, and they want to farm. The barrier to entry there is just insane because you try and buy any kind of property. I mean, heck, it's just expensive. Try to buy a house. It's insane. And so when you start talking about acreage, okay, well, the only way you can get a price point down for acreage, like what's the rule in real estate? Location. Yeah. Okay, you're finding something way out away from something. You're either going to have to move, or you're so far away, or it's a property that's so crappy nobody wants it anyway.
Right, it's just scrub land.
Yeah, and so I can see a lot of hardships, I would say, for the new generation or entry level. And on top of it, because you got folks that will come up and say, hey, I want to buy I've had people approach me like, I would like to buy some land to start a farm.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Nothing against that, but the geographic location that a lot of the property is in, okay, the amount of money that can bring just for real estate is, orders of magnitude over what anyone can pay for farm acreage.
Through property tax.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's another hobby horse of mine. I like riding.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So yeah, I can see, just the cost alone of trying to get the land is a huge barrier. Cost of equipment is crazy. The rules that they now have on equipment, especially like with regards to diesel, after 2015, you have to run DEF.
Yeah.
If you have a piece of equipment that was made after 2015, it's got to have diesel exhaust fluid. It's not, depending on who you follow on social media, some portray it as end of the world, and a huge inconvenience. Okay. For a small time guy, it is an added cost. I view it as stupid. In other words, to save the environment, I have to go buy this processed fluid in a plastic jug and pour that into my machine and then throw the jug away.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm really helping the environment.
It'd be interesting, like total cost and total, what's the juice and what's the squeeze.
Exactly. Those are some of the little hoops you have to jump through. I'm lucky enough though that, because I am cheap, all my equipment is pre-def.
Yeah.
So I don't do that. But I also know I'm coming up on needing to replace some equipment.
Right.
It's starting to age out. I'm noticing that I'm spending more time and money on repairs, and parts are getting harder and harder to get.
Yeah.
Like, oh crap, it's coming. I'm going to have to upgrade. And yeah, you're going to have to, jump off that cliff and deal with it.
Right.
So that's another hurdle I see that, I've not necessarily gone through it, but I have some friends that do, and it's very irritating. Because also, if that DEF system malfunctions, you're down.
Yeah.
And you can't fix it. That's where it has to be. It's like, okay, you got to load it up and get it serviced.
Yeah.
Another
barrier to entry.
It is. It is. Yeah. Don't even get me started about John Deere.
So if you don't mind, let's dig down that rabbit hole, or go down that rabbit hole of property tax. That's been something that I talked about on a couple of previous episodes when Tony Moffitt was here.
Yeah.
And I talk about it from time to time.
Talking about the lease payments to the government?
Yeah, it's a lease payment. Because, if I got to pay a tax, and if I don't pay that for the property owned, whether that's a house or land in-house,
yeah,
or even a car, and if I don't pay that tax, men with guns show up and they take that property. So am I really the owner of that property if they can tax me on it? I would argue I'm not. I'm a leasee or leaser of that of given property, because if you didn't pay your property tax on your land, men with guns would show up and take you off your land.
Oh yeah, I've had that drilled in my head as long as I can remember. I mean, I'm talking 5-6 years old, sitting over at my grandparents' house.
Yeah,
and sitting around the breakfast table. And I distinctly remember, seeing somebody holding up a tax assessment, and they're like, "You have to pay this. If you don't, you will lose your land."
Yeah.
And I couldn't understand. I was like, "Wow, okay, that's important." And I have similar thoughts. It is frustrating. I'm thankful that our state and our location is, I would say, lenient.
It's a little on the friendly side. That's why we stayed here.
Yeah, for agriculture especially, they're very lenient. Now we're really opening the door here. But I mean, the thing that terrifies me is when I see a lot of rallies, or I would say you start hearing certain sound bites coming up of like, well, it's not fair for a farmer to have that much property not pay, equivalent tax. I'm like, whoa,
Yeah.
time out.
You like eating?
Yeah, that worries me. I mean, I always wonder, like, well, if the political climate changes and taxes go up, yeah, eventually it comes to a point where you're like, I can't even afford to keep the property.
Yeah.
And it is a lease payment in my mind.
It is 100%.
I mean, it is, because, like you said, if you don't make that payment, it's the asset is taken away from you.
Right.
So that means you're just paying for the right to use that asset.
That's right. Or just to live on it.
Yeah.
If you did nothing with it.
Right.
Or in the case, I just live in a house now.
Yeah. I would. There are times I really think I would do better if there was just, hey, here's your bill to be a U.S. citizen.
Yeah.
It's like, because, I mean, the government has to have money. The government has to have, it has to have capital to operate. I get that.
It does. But have you ever read The Creature from Jekyll Island?
No.
Okay. You got to read it.
All right.
And what it describes is the creation of the Fed. Jekyll Island is an island off Georgia, I think. And a bunch of bankers and a senator had a meeting out, and this is a well-documented meeting in Jekyll Island. And from that meeting was born the Federal Reserve, which is a central bank for the U.S. They call it the Federal Reserve, but it is literally a central bank.
Yeah.
And some things changed between the Federal Reserve getting created in 1913, and in 1917, the income tax, temporary tax, was created. And our whole tax structure changed from that point forward. And several other changes were instituted, which are kind of immaterial to this. But one of the key ones is before the income tax, we had roads before the income tax and the Federal Reserve.
Right.
We had fire departments. We had a professional police force or a constabulary. How did they pay for that? We had civic buildings that were built. How did that happen?
I was going to say, that's the question I have is, okay, how was that paid for?
And there were state and local taxes, but they weren't like these property taxes that we see. There was no income tax, again, a temporary measure. Most of the revenue created by the federal government was through tariffs. So trade comes in and it gets tariffed.
Yeah,
And
tax of goods.
Yeah, tax those imported goods. And that changed things, and it changed things in my mind in a very bad way. Now tariffs have we don't want to have a trade war with China, or we don't have a trade war with so-and-so. That is how we did business back then. And we didn't have this property tax business, and we didn't have this income tax business. And so you could produce as much as you want, and of course you're going to pay you're going to pay for, let's say you want to buy a Mercedes, and it's produced in Germany. Of course, it's going to get tariffed on the way in, and of course, you're going to pay that. They're not going to do that out of the kindness of their hearts. Like, you're going to pay for that extra over and above.
Yeah, it's a pass through.
It's a pass through.
Yeah,
but it's on those consumption or purchase of goods that get purchased outright or just purchased then consumed.
Yeah,
that is how revenue was generated, and of course, the federal government was much smaller back then. They didn't have the litany of agencies that we have now. So that's one thing in my mind. I would love it in my lifetime if we just abolish this whole business of income tax. Constitutional amendment to remove them. The idea of property tax out the window. Of course, we're going to pay some certain things, but I'd rather have toll roads, or, hey, we want to raise money to hire a contractor to build a road from A to B that would improve all of our lives that are in this area. So we, a bill gets passed or some sort of measure that comes up that we all vote on in a community, and we agree, and then we hire that contractor that we know that builds roads in this area, and this the construction company down here, and he does it.
And in that bill, it needs to go up to a certain dollar amount, and once you achieve that, you stop.
Yeah, you stop.
Yeah,
yeah.
Not this. Hey, we're going to do this. 8 cents gas tax in perpetuity.
Yeah.
It's like, whoa.
In the meantime, the administrative state just continues to grow.
Yeah.
And state, local, up at the federal level. So, check out that book.
Creature from Jekyll Island?
The Creature from Jekyll Island.
All right.
I'll bring it. I'm about halfway through it right now.
All right.
There's a whole. I'm going to do a podcast on like the major themes from it.
Yeah, I think you need to do a podcast on your reading list. Because let's see, I've got about 4 or 5 on my Kindle queue. I'm like, well, Adam told me about this one. I'm reading that.
Maybe that would be a good one. Things that I enjoy reading for education purposes, not for pleasure. So earlier we were talking about before the podcast started. I mentioned the Chevron doctrine.
Yeah.
And for the listener, there was a Supreme Court case that was decided. Wasn't this previous Monday, but there was a Monday, I think, right before July 4th, maybe. Might have been July 8th.
Yeah.
At any rate, Chevron doctrine got shut down by like a 6-3 margin, something like that. And it was great news. It was great news. So what the Chevron doctrine was, and I think it was decided back in '84 originally, all of these states, or not state, but federal regulating agencies, they have, they're not law.
Right.
They're an extension of law. They're regulations that enable the law.
Yeah.
It says, hey, safe conduct on the throughways and whatever. But what that Chevron doctrine back in 1984 said was, well, these legislators and the judges that decide the facts of the matter, they don't understand the details of it, but these agencies have specialists that do. And so whatever they say goes. It was decided a case, Chevron Oil and somebody else. And so what you saw was a growth from that point on in regulations.
Bureaucracy.
And bureaucracy.
Yeah.
And that system got more and more nested to where if I wanted to start, let's say I wanted to start a ranch. And so I wanted to buy a ton of land, big enough to qualify by a ranch in your terms, and probably mine too, because I still don't know what. I know it's probably size. Maybe it depends on whether or not you wear a cowboy hat pretty much full time. And maybe the size of your belt buckle.
I keep waiting for that to happen. I was like, can't justify the hat.
I have one. I usually don't wear it, but
so I've got one too, and I'm like, yeah, no, that's my going out and dancing hat. Yeah.
So what that got overturned, and so now that means that these rulemaking agencies and regulating agencies do not have the power of law like they did in the past. Which that means that some of this stuff is going to get dismantled slowly over time. It'll take a little bit of time to dismantle it, but things like the FDA, OSHA, that's a big one. A recent topic that I tend to hop on once in a while, out is the whole COVID thing. The executive branch, and at the time I was a government employee, they could say, well, you need to do this, you need to do that. Whether or not it was legal or not, that's for the courts to decide years from now. I didn't see it as legal, so I left. And so before I got fired, and but the other industry partners that we typically work with, they're not executive employees.
Right.
They had to comply because OSHA said, well, you got to wear a mask and you got to get the shot.
Yeah.
That is now going to get disarmed over time.
Good.
So, so this is a good thing. That's encouraging.
Yeah.
That doctrine is now shut down, and I'm looking forward to seeing more and more court cases that that now will get challenged because of that Supreme Court decision. Then that stuff will just get disconnected, and maybe some of this rulemaking business will get shut down, and it's going to definitely affect farmers between the Bureau of Land Management, USDA, and FDA.
Yeah. Oh, I hope so. Yeah, I mean, the amount of rules, I'll confess that I've really, in terms of farming, I mean, the main things that I try to keep an eye on, I want to make sure EPA, doesn't come knocking.
Yeah, that's another one of my favorites.
Seriously, I mean, herbicide. Okay, I know. Are you familiar with White Oak Pastures? They're down in South Georgia.
Yes.
The beef is amazing.
Yeah.
You can buy it at Publix. I highly recommend them. No one, no paid endorsement here.
Yeah. No one's getting paid on this podcast, let me tell you.
And the owner is a great guy. I've listened to him a couple of times on Rogan. I follow him on social media. I see his ads, and I subscribe. I buy meat from them online. And they're great. They are 100% regenerative farming. Because he got on this tirade about fertilizers and herbicides, pesticides, all that. I agree, and I think he's doing wonderful. I am a one-man show.
Yeah.
And I know he's saying, he's got chickens for this and that, livestock over here for doing everything plays a vital role.
Right.
All right. I'm sure that if I dedicated my entire life, and all of my time to that, I could probably make something work. However, mine is also time management. And so I spray herbicide on fence rows, have to.
Mm-hmm.
If not, I'm going to lose fences that I built.
Right.
And
it doesn't take long either.
No, God, no.
my little time doing it was like, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, I've got sections that I'm going to have to bulldoze again because I couldn't get to them.
And those cows are escape artists.
All they have is time. All they have is time to figure it out.
They love walking perimeters.
Yes. So, that I would say that my biggest concern is with EPA. Anytime I do buy herbicides, when I'm reading how to mix it at the same time, I'm like, am I good to do this? Yeah. Do I need a license? These are the questions that come through, and I'm reading in the booklet and stuff, and I'll go, well, they wouldn't have let me buy it, if it was that regulated.
Yeah.
I was like, well, I didn't have to show identification, so it's not that controlled. But I'm always concerned. Whether we like it or not, I think we live in a police state.
I agree.
I'm probably saying way too much, but, I know I've got Huntsville all around me,
mm-hmm.
and I know people mean well. But I always worry about somebody, if they see me riding along spraying a fence row, I always wonder if they're going to call somebody in on me to be investigated. It's like, well, what are you spraying?
Yeah. Check your tank.
Yeah. Have to make sure, I always make sure that I've got, the proper receipts, proper paperwork, anytime.
How long do you have to keep that, or do you just keep it?
I have no idea.
Okay.
And yeah, I've got closets full of boxes of crap.
Yeah.
That when I pass on, we're going to have one hell of a bonfire.
Yeah.
Somebody is, yeah, I worry about that. There's different things that kind of go through your mind. You're like, oh gosh, that could get me. I do remember having a conversation with a neighbor who lived, a couple miles down the road a couple years back, and it was talking about endangered species. And that's important. But I witnessed the flip side of anything being considered endangered because, he was an old timer,
mm-hmm.
And he says, they're saying that our area is, could be a habitat for whatever. I can't even remember. I went, okay. I said, I don't think I'd know one if I saw one.
Yeah.
And he says, well, I can tell you this much. If I see one, I'm shooting it. He's like, I'm shooting it, burying it, never to be heard from again.
Right.
He's like, I will not have, because he was scared to death that they were going to come in and just clamp down and say, we now own this, we sanction this habitat for, spotted owl or whatever, and you can't do anything.
Blind cave shrimp.
Yeah. Well, and that was going to just decimate his way of life.
Yeah.
You're talking about taking away someone's livelihood. So he's terrified about that. Anytime wetlands,
right.
Something can automatically be deemed a wetland by some jurisdiction. kind of going back to your Chevron rule, it's like, well, you get some agency, some office come in and they see standing water. They can say, well, this is wetland.
Yeah, you can't do anything with it.
Right. And, whether I understand. I do have low spots on my place too. And yeah, as far as like building on it, you're not going to do that, but it is an area that I can turn cows out. They may not graze it, but there are areas that they can get shade.
Yeah.
It is an area that they can at least walk around. So that kind of stuff always bothers me, and it's always in the back of my mind. And everybody has a list of worries. This is just tacking onto the list. It's like, oh, okay, this could be a problem.
Have you, as your family, you or your family known anybody that was farming in this area, but then they just got overwhelmed? They're like, I can't deal with this anymore, or they got their land taken because of some of the things that we're talking about.
We've had land taken, eminent domain.
Was it so they could develop it for houses?
Roads.
Yeah.
A lot of families lost. My grandmother, her family lost her farm under the TVA Act.
Yeah.
In fact, I still have the letter. In fact, we lost a lot of property to TVA back in 2005, 2006.
Yeah.
And I went to Knoxville and lobbied, went to a TVA board of directors meeting and lobbied. And I used the letter from my grandmother's. It was I think TVA Act was it 33?
33.
Okay. The letter's dated 36.
Mm-hmm.
And that was when TVA took their farm to flood.
Mm-hmm.
Paid them pennies on the dollar.
Yeah, of course.
So they can't say they took it. That's the, that's what chaps my ass. There's, well, we paid you for it. It's like, yeah, you didn't pay jack. And now they have to start over completely with, square one with just a few dollars.
Right. And that was their land.
Yeah.
They owned it.
Yeah. So my grandmother lost her family lost her property to the TVA. They flooded it for Gunnersville. That happened back then. My father and I, we lost several acres. Like I said, this is the 2005, 2006 time frame. They put it, TVA needed a switching station. And when I lobbied them, it was not to, no, you cannot put a switching station. It was, we have property in other areas along that same transmission line.
Mm-hmm.
We will give you, not even ask for anything in return. Please don't put it in the middle of our hayfield.
Yeah.
And they claimed about 10, 15 acres in the middle of flat hayfield. And here's the pisser. It's that they own the land, and they put easements around everything.
Sure.
But technically, we have to maintain the easement.
That's nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
You talk about no grease.
Yeah. That's an awful situation.
So yeah, there's that. We lost property there. We lost property, Cecil Ashburn.
Mm-hmm.
When Cecil Ashburn, that's a road in Huntsville when it was put in, connecting South Huntsville with,
Hampton Cove.
Yeah, the Hampton Cove area. We lost a lot of property there to put the road in.
It's convenient.
It is convenient. And I drive it.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be a hypocrite and say no, I don't ever drive. Yeah, I drive it. I use it. It stung like the dickens.
Yeah.
When it happened. It happened. I was in high school.
Shouldn't stuff like that be though, instead of the way it's done, shouldn't it be done in a different manner? In other words, and I'm imagining a whole lot of things because you gave me some details, but not the whole story.
Yeah.
But I imagine it's one of those things where you get a letter or you get informed by some manner that, hey, we're going to do this.
Yeah.
And, it's been decided.
Oh, yeah.
It's like past tense now.
Yeah.
And so now you have to give it up or you have to fight it. So now the decision's been made. It's a foregone conclusion that's going to happen. Contracts are being let to execute this plan to build the road. And it's, like you said, it's a convenient road. And it helps out the area, not just Huntsville, but just the area. But shouldn't that kind of thing be decided where, okay, we're like a much more active citizenry, and we go to our county board meetings and our county commission meetings and our city and council meetings, and the idea gets brought up, and the Drake family says, I like the idea of a road, but how about somewhere else that might be a little more convenient for everybody, and it don't take my land? Or if you're going to do that, then I want fair market value for the land rather than just we're going to take it and give you pennies on the dollar.
Right.
There's got to be a better way to do this.
Yeah. They, yeah.
And it might have happened exactly like that. I'm just assuming.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, they play games with taxes. When they assessed it under eminent domain, it's assessed as, timberland, grazeland, whatever. When we ended up having to pay taxes after, it was assessed as, future development.
Mm-hmm.
And so we ended up, our taxes went up.
Yeah.
Like,
now you want to unload it.
Yeah. And they're like, well, you're right on this road, it's been improved.
Yeah.
So your taxes went up. And you're like, that's not cool, guys.
That's shady is what it is.
Oh gosh,
shady.
yeah.
It's basically like we're getting ruled by the mob.
Yeah.
Not a mob, but the mob.
Yeah. Yeah.
They make the rules and they do what they want, and we just have to roll with it.
Yeah.
Because you can't fight City Hall.
No. So, yeah. I haven't seen, and I don't know of any examples or anyone that's lost it because of, they didn't pay property tax. I don't know that. I just know the eminent domain is a big deal. I know that now I have seen families, and I've had cousins that have lost property due to a death.
Mm-hmm.
And they did not do, their estate planning did not account for inheritance tax.
Yeah.
And that, you want to talk about government overreach or just the tax man destroying a culture.
Yeah.
And I mean, maybe I am getting worked up on this. That it destroys a family.
Yeah, because that kind of lifestyle gets passed down from generation to the next, right?
And I'm not just talking farms. I mean, just any business.
Yeah.
But you see it a lot with farms and property. Okay, if you have, to kind of put it in perspective, if you have land out in the middle of nowhere, Mojave Desert, okay, you can have 1,000 acres and pass that down, and there's really no inheritance tax because the assessed value is so low and nobody cares.
Right.
Okay. Well, population grows, cities grow, urban infrastructure grows. Okay, all of that encroaches on areas that used to be farms.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, just like we said, when a road goes through on eminent domain and they can say that they've made improvements, well, now you have all this other real estate coming in around you. So, everyone views your open land as, prime development.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The problem you get into is, okay, if my father owned everything, had all the property deeded in his name, his personal name, when he passes, and even if he has a will and says, I'm going to give this this number of acres to my son, this number of acres to my daughter. The federal government comes in and they will assess inheritance tax, and it is insane the amount of the percentage. There was at one point in time, I think it was in 2012, maybe, that it actually went to zero. Inheritance tax went to zero, but it sunset and then immediately started coming back up. I used to keep track of it, but I'll be honest with you, for my own mental health, I had to take a step back because, I mean, you want to talk about just anxiety.
Yeah.
That's where you lose your land.
Yeah.
Is when a patriarch passes, and if the estate planning is not done properly, you lose it.
Yeah.
Because you can't pay it. I mean, they come in and they assess it, and they say, well, all of this could be sold for homes, and you could make so many million, and therefore we want 50% of that, so you owe the federal government. Overnight, not only are you mourning the loss of your father, but overnight you're now responsible and beholden to the federal government to pay them, several $1 million.
Yeah.
And you're like,
you can't do that.
I can't do that. And then they're like, well, then you need to fire sell the land. So you are, not only can you not get what the land is worth, because you're now you're on the clock.
Yeah.
And I think you have 90 days. I think. I mean, I guarantee you someone out there is going to say, no, I'm wrong. But you're on the clock. There is a time frame in which you have to come up with that kind of cash. And the only way to do it is to dump it.
Yeah.
And so that's where developers swoop in and get it super cheap. When people get upset and they see a farm getting taken down and a shopping mall going up, I'm like, well, sometimes it's people capitalizing on an investment. And there's nothing wrong with that.
No.
But I think it's an equal amount of times. It is a family that has fallen, in a very bad state with the government, and they are trying to do whatever they can to stay out of jail.
Yeah, they've got no choice.
Yeah, and that, in my mind, I mean, is just straight up theft.
It is theft,
and I mean
100% theft. Is that rooted? Is the linchpin in that chain of events? Is that property tax? Because they're assessing the land, and it could be developed, and we could tax it.
No, it's not even.
It starts obviously.
I guess you could say property tax, because I mean, you see it
that's
with
their motivation. I would argue that's their motivation.
It is a motivation, and. But I mean, like I said, you see it with small business owners. That's how you can always see a small business will get folded, because the value of that business comes into play, and people are like, "Oh gosh, I can either, close the business, dump it, whatever, or I got to come up with this kind of tax."
Right.
You see it with financial. You can have a family that has done very well, and they have amassed a certain amount of wealth. And when the person that amassed that wealth passes, what gives the government right to come in and say, well, now we get half of it?
Yeah.
I just don't. I mean, believe me, that one right there, that yeah, that one. I mean, I can even feel my blood pressure going up right now just thinking about it.
So what you're talking about is it's a kind of we're in agreement on this, because James and I are meme sharers, and I end up sending him a lot of funny memes related to taxes.
You get me through my day.
Yeah. So one of the things is when you compare the thinking of let's say the typical American, because this is before the United States even existed, completely different than it is now. Like it's a foreign country to us. If they were to look at us and see what we're doing, like what are you people thinking? How did this happen?
Yeah.
And so I talked about this heuristic several weeks ago. I discovered it for Brett Weinstein. And I forget who the guy that made it up, but it perfectly summarizes kind of what we're talking about. And he's made a mnemonic out of it. It's called POSIWID. The purpose of a system is what it does, and it isn't what it doesn't do.
Yeah.
So the purpose of the system is what it does. So you can identify the purpose of the system by what it accomplishes. So what happens? Well, we have small-time farmers, medium-time farmers, and they're just trying to capitalize on their inheritance that they had and produce food in this case, so they can provide for their family.
Yeah,
it's something they might love doing, and through property taxes, through overreach by regulators, they're getting kind of the small-time farmer has been crushed the past, I'd say, 75 years.
Oh, yeah.
I'd say. And then now we have the growth of these giant industrial farmers. And that's what you see. And so the problem with that is, they can produce a lot of food very efficiently. It comes at a cost to, in some regards, our health from what has to be used in those industrial farms. But if I put all my eggs in that industrial farming basket, and let's say one of them, there's something that happens to that industrial farm. Let's say food storage gets destroyed, or an entire range of chicken houses just go up in flames. And this has happened throughout in certain areas of the country. This is happening. Our food supply is getting kind of eerily destroyed in certain areas.
I remember the headlines, and I started wondering, like, this is like a movie script.
It is like a movie script. So if the nation loses, let's say, a significant amount of egg production or chicken production or beef production, or the ability to process that, that's kind of bad.
Yeah.
And that affects our food supply. Right now we have so much food. I mean, I could just go to any grocery store and pick up about anything that I need. I know I can pick up anything I need and about anything I want, depending on the store. And we're not some huge industrial area. It's like a moderately sized town, and I can get about anything. But it may not always be that way. So we need to watch out for that. We need to encourage farmers like you and that have small scale farms, because that's the lifeblood of this nation. That is what feeds us. That's good for our nation. So I would argue that if you look at through the lens of Positwood, the purpose of the system seems to be crushing the little guy and encouraging the growth of the large guy.
Yeah.
And then we might be putting ourselves in a bad position. So I'll wind it up. We're coming up on an hour. That went quick.
Oh, sorry.
No, I enjoyed every minute of it.
Yeah.
But I encourage you to get involved in your local county and city, municipality governments. Be involved. Kind of look for these laws and these lobbyings that occur, and these movements that occur, and become more active in your community. And I'm talking more to myself than anybody else. That's something I think about doing, but I keep. It's ugly, and I don't want to do it. But
it is.
If we don't do it, everybody else is, and we don't have our interests in mind.
Well, I mean, my uncle, he was very active politically, and he got named by the governor of Alabama, I want to say in the 80s. He got named to a couple of committees, and he was able to go down to Montgomery, and essentially was able to get involved in the whole political process. And he really enjoyed that because, I think for one, just the social aspect, he got to see what all else was out there, but he liked being able to give his perspective, whenever on some of this bureaucracy stuff. He was kind of an advisor.
Yeah.
And he was very involved in the politics. I remember him telling me as I was growing up, I needed to be. I will confess that I'm not.
Yeah. Me neither.
I don't like them. I don't associate with people I don't like.
Well, it's a meeting at the end of the day, or maybe even the middle of the day, of people that you don't necessarily need to see.
Yeah.
And this is the way I look at it. I should want to see them operate and see them working, because they might be saying things that run counter to what my belief system is.
And, and again, kind of going back to when we first opened up, is like, I really do, I would like to think that I try to be objective. And I don't know of many, in fact, I've never met anyone that intentionally, wakes up in the morning and says, I am going to screw somebody over today.
Right.
I've never met anyone. I I have met people that think what they're doing has good intentions, and I think they mean well. It's just the problem is that usually what they end up doing is just not working out.
Yeah.
So that I don't think we have now. Granted, I'm sure we have some crooked politicians, but I mean, again, I think a lot of this is all rooted in good intentions. But it's like anything, you don't know what the side effects are going to be.
Now, and there's a phrase for that.
Yeah.
The road to hell is paved with good.
And here we are.
Yeah, and here we are. So it's that do-gooderism that's run amok. And well, anyway, we'll close it up here, and we definitely need to have you come back. When I say we, I mean me and Dusty.
Oh yeah.
So hopefully,
wait till I get going.
maybe we'll do a part 2.
Oh, okay. That sounds good, man.
We'll get warmed up. What we'll do is rewatch this one and like, oh yeah,
that reminds me.
But we'll close it up here, and but I appreciate you coming out, James.
Yeah, man.
It was a great discussion. Hopefully you, the listener, enjoyed it, and appreciate your time, and we'll see you next week on Mishmash Men.
That sounds great. Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Bye.